then it's okay for one or both to cheat as long as they know and they're okay.
But you're using the word cheat when we're not talking about cheating.
I'm saying not have sexual fidelity. So have sexual experiences, relationships with other people, whether that's through a screen or in real life. And, there are studies that show, I have one right here that shows that married people who more frequently view porn, even if it's together, even if it's like we're consenting, this is a thing we're doing together, are more likely to experience marital dissatisfaction down the line than couples that do not look at porn together. So pornography has a pernicious effect even on consenting couples who are saying we're doing this together. It's so great.
And that was a longitudinal study based on the social science survey with 2,000 people. It's not just like a correlative effect.
So even if in our minds we rationalize and we live in the unreality of this is not affecting me, I can have this open marriage or I can have this open relationship and my partner can look at porn or have another sexual relationship, it still affects you in the real world, and it still affects your long-term potential for happiness and fidelity, or not just fidelity, but happiness and fulfillment in the relationship. And so we can tell ourselves a theory or a myth of like, hey, it's going to be okay, I'm cool with this. But in reality, it doesn't work that way in the long run.
But see, like with a lot of this, I'm not sure if you guys were really frustrated looking up this stuff too, because so many studies conflict when it comes to porn and viewing. And it's like women who view pornography report higher sexual satisfaction when they view it with a partner. In fact, the data on women,
why would that be, Jazmen? Why would that be?
What do you mean, why would that be?
Well, you just said women report higher satisfaction if the porn is being viewed with a partner, because at least they feel like I'm not being 100% cheated on in this moment.
No, I don't think that's it. I think you're just putting your framework on everybody else. Like, I'm a woman too. I don't care if my partner watches porn. It's not just me trying to satisfy him. It's not just me being like, and I think a lot of people, you have to separate being with another partner physically versus porn, because I think the numbers there would be vastly different on who's okay if their partner, when they're not around, is watching porn versus who's okay with them sleeping with another person in real life. I think you're going to get widely different opinions there from girlfriends, wives, women on whether that's okay or not.
I would say when we look at the studies, like for example, in 2023, Engelkamp et al. Published a study in the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy, and it did a quantitative analysis on the most common themes among couples where the man views pornography is that the woman is glad that he talked about it openly, but disapproves, or is allowing the husband to look at pornography but does not want to hear about it. So I think you would say that only a minority of women are positively in favor of this. It's either negative or ambivalent.
Well, and I think the point is the longitudinal study you mentioned and I mentioned is that even those that say they're in favor of it and are like watching it as a couple have worse outcomes down the line. And I think that's part of the point here is that even if you're in a very unique situation, you're making your living doing this thing, right? And so in your mind, of course it's going to be great. I know you're going to defend it and say it's going to be great, but the reality is even people that are defending it or saying it's fine in my marriage down the line don't have the best outcome.
Yeah, well, you
also, to be fair too, real quick, because you talked about based on a career, you guys are both ideologically, you could never change your position on this.
That's completely not true. Of course,
aren't you both religious?
All the studies show that it's good for you. Would you say it's okay? I chose
to be Catholic, and I can choose to reject my faith.
Sure, but if like the research,
no one's forcing me to be Catholic.
Yeah, but she could also change her career too, right?
My point is that even if
that, like,
all the data show that it would,
just one at a time.
We can change our mind on empirical questions about whether a majority of people feel satisfaction in something. You can't use a social science survey to determine whether something is moral or immoral.
Yeah, sure. I was only pushing back on the claim that like because it's her job, she has to defend it. Because
I was more speaking to outcomes though, because what I'm trying to explain here is not. My point here is that you can say, and one can say, I'm comfortable with this, I'm fine with this, it's okay in my marriage or my relationship. But my point is the social data shows that people who are comfortable with open relationships or pornography in their relationship have worse outcomes down the line.
Well, the people have the worst, worst outcomes when it comes to viewing pornography are people who have moral incongruence with it. That's there's been a huge meta-analysis where they looked at the number one determinant or the number one predictor of having bad experiences with porn or quote unquote porn addiction, which the medical consensus is it's not a thing, is moral incongruence, and being religious is one of the biggest predictors of that. So I agree, porn is really bad for Catholics. I just don't agree that it's bad for everybody.
But my point here is that even people who find a way to morally rationalize the
but
use of pornography or whatever it is, down the line, at large, outcomes are worse for open marriages.
But that kind of argument is like saying, well, gambling addiction isn't really real because the people who are most upset about gambling are only the people who are upset about losing money. The people who don't care about losing money, well, they're not really that psychologically disturbed about gambling a lot. But maybe they should be worried about that, just like people should be worried about what porn is doing to them when it desensitizes their brain and it makes them think that I need more and more hits and more disturbing pornography to get off.
But the difference is that with, and that's why the DSM-5 accepts gambling. They've said multiple times, they've rejected porn multiple times because you can't make a link to how much people
they
view.
Include hypersexuality under impulse control disorder.
Not in the DSM-5. That's in the World Health Organization. It's a compulsion, but not an addiction.
But is a compulsion a good thing, Jazmen?
Well, is hypersexuality just a compulsion to masturbate, or is it a compulsion to have sexual experiences?
I mean, either way is a compulsion that you are at the mercy of, and that often brings a lot of harm and suffering.
No, but I don't see the difference there. That if you can be in a situation where I think gambling and porn, they're very similar in their compulsivity. That there are lots of people who can gamble. I gamble, and I didn't lose the house. Lots of people can gamble, but there's a subset when they gamble, it turns their brain on too much and they need to get more and more highs from it. So they gamble more and more and more. And just even seeing the slot machine, it does something to their brain. And they're in a situation where I don't want to be gambling. I feel bad. I don't want to be doing this, but they just can't stop. Similar thing with porn. There's lots of people who watch porn and they don't turn into maniacs or anything like that. But there's a subset where it lights up their brains and they know, I don't want to be doing this. I know it's just killing my marriage. My wife feels awful knowing that I go and look at this stuff. I feel bad, but I can't stop. Don't those seem like similar levels of compulsion?
It may seem that way, but the scientific consensus, right, the DSM-5 statement is that other excessive behavioral patterns such as internet gaming have also been described, but the research on these and other behavioral syndromes is less clear. They make it akin to exercise addiction, shopping addiction, and sex addiction. The data is just not there that it affects you the way gambling does. That's not me saying it. That's what the scientific consensus.
But the DSM-5 is not an infallible Bible for everyone. You have other studies. For example, Love et al. Published a study on the Neuroscientific Foundation of Pornography Addiction, and that was a 2015 article, and they a meta-analysis, and they do link it to other addictions and other compulsions. So I think if people just look at it, you just take a bird's eye view, the person who feels bad gambling and can't stop, the person who feels bad shopping and can't stop, and the person who looks at porn or sees prostitutes and feels bad and can't stop. It all seems pretty similar to me. But the
difference is that with porn, they've done multiple studies where it's like somebody who has positive attitudes toward it versus someone who has negative attitudes toward it. They're watching the same amount and they're having the same.
Those are short-term studies, though.
But the
point is, you can tell yourself, again, you can live in unreality and tell yourself, you know, this sexual act of infidelity, I know you don't call it infidelity because someone consented to it, but me going and, you know, being polyamorous, or me going and having multiple sexual experiences outside of my marriage or my relationship, or me going and looking at pornography or using pornography, you can tell yourself and experience short-term pleasure. You absolutely
I think
can.
A lot of wives would say that if their husband is chatting with you on a live cam, they would say that's cheating. Do you think a lot of wives would feel that way?
You don't know how many wives find me for their husbands.
Also, wait, hold on. Yeah, when we talk about like cheating or murder, when we talk about like murder is clearly unjustified killing, right?
Where do we talk about murder?
I'm just saying that the word murder means that's unjustified killing. It's baked into there's no such thing as a justified murder. When you use the word cheating, then you're begging the question. Of course, it's wrong. Yeah. But the question is whether or not these behaviors can be engaged in like consensual ways. Right? So to say that like, but
that takes us back to what is sex for. That might maybe
that's fine. Yeah, we can go back to that. Wait, hold on, wait. I'm just
go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying that you can't just keep calling it cheating over and over and over again because you're begging the question. You're loading in with the word cheating is baked into this idea that a boundary is being violated or that a non-consensual activity is happening, and that might be your position and that might be your opinion, but you can't have that perspective on two other people's boundaries. If they say, well, in our relationship we're allowed to watch porn, it's inappropriate for you to call that cheating.
A different point in response to Jazmen's
Well, no, hold on. I'm just being clear because Jazmen contradicted that point, and then you tried to explain why. Well, actually, it is always infidelity. When infidelity again has baked into it that you're tautologically trying to define away the argument, which is whether or not you can engage in these behaviors in a healthy way. And you're saying, well, obviously you can't because it's infidelity. It's like, well, you're begging the question. So if we're going to talk about the behaviors themselves, we can, but you can't call them all cheating and infidelity.
You can define the terms as you please. I think my point here with Jazmen.
Well, hold on. Wait, what I'm not defining it as I please. We all agree that that's what those words mean. Every single person watching. Infidelity and cheating means that you are doing something in contradiction contradiction to what your partner wants. We all agree with that, and we all agree
Well,
that
it's
those are bad.
specific to sexual behavior
Sure,
outside
but
of your
everybody
relationship
here
with your
agrees that
partner.
infidelity and cheating is bad, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we all agree with that. So then why say like, well, this is cheating? We all agree that that's bad.
I mean,
It's whether
we
or not
can
it is
agree
cheating,
to
right?
disagree on the point that, yes, I think it is infidelity
Well,
or cheating.
So you think that
to
if,
have
like,
sex outside of
two
your
people are in a
marriage,
relationship
I
and
think
they say
is
that, hey, it's
infidelity or
okay if we
cheating.
watch